Amber, welcome again. Thank you for being here. Your thoughts on just the amount of tragedy and death over the weekend, and how you and those around you processed all that.
It was a weird and tough weekend. We were going into the weekend with pretty light news, it seemed, coming around to Monday. And then all of a sudden, we had these three really horrific tragedies. And another one thwarted, by the way, I would just mention there was a Christmas market in Germany where five individuals were arrested for planning an attack on a Christmas market in Bavaria. Germany's been canceling a lot of their Christmas markets because of the threat of these attacks. And so it's just a wave of violence. And I think it makes it harder, as you mentioned, Mark, that there's still not a lot of answers in at least two of these cases. I mean, really all three, but I think mostly the Brown case.
Yeah.
There was a moment where a reporter was asking the president of the university what was happening in the classroom before the shooting. Was it a class? Was it a review session? And she had no idea. And this was 6 hours after the shooting. They got into custody a person of interest, but still have not arrested the shooter. That person was released. And the video they released of the suspect was completely unhelpful. It was just a video of a guy in all black walking away from the camera, couldn't see his face, nothing. And so I think the lack of conclusion in these three cases uh, just creates a sense of unease.
Yeah. Kevin, before you jump in, let me just say, fittingly, symbolically, I'm looking at the corner of my eye, the three main cable news channels, and they're each leading with a different one of the stories. Fox is leading with Australia, CNN is leading with Brown, and MSNBC leading with Rob Reiner, although Rob was a regular guest on Morning Joe, so a little bit of a different perspective there, perhaps. The other thing I want to note is, uh, well, go ahead, Kevin. You jump in. I'll save it for after you go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just add to what Amber said, and it's great to be reunited with Amber too. That it's all just so senseless, and the fact that there are still so many questions out there, especially in Providence, and my heart goes out to them because of the uncertainty of, the relief of this idea that there was a person in custody, a person of interest, and then to have that person released and to have that uncertainty around is their community actually safe, is problematic. And this balance that we have to have with releasing what information is out there to the public, but also making sure that it's verified before we do that. And we've seen in recent weeks and months with similar incidences where things have been released prematurely by people of authority, and it just creates more uncertainty. It fuels conspiracies, and it's just problematic, especially heading into obviously it's the first night of Hanukkah last night, and then obviously into the Christmas season.
Yeah. One of the things about there were late night press conferences last night, practically back to back. First in Providence, where they announced that they were releasing the person who had been questioned, and then in California. Neither of those was very satisfying, and I am always a critic, even in tense times, of law enforcement who don't know how to brief properly. It's got to be part of the job. And to go to Kevin, the point you raised, I want to discuss first. You can't say the lockdown's over, the community can be calm, we've got somebody in custody, then release that person and say, well, we no longer need a lockdown, without explaining it. It doesn't make any sense, right? So that's a troubling thing. The topic I want to discuss, because again, we could spend the hour on these three cases, is the in each of these cases there's something out there that's being reported, some online, but in some cases by news organizations that are reputable, that are not being part of the conversation. I'm not for rush to judgment. I don't think we need to know everything right away. But in each of these cases, a debate should be occurring, and isn't. Most pronouncedly in Australia. You've got ABC in Australia, which is one of their biggest news organizations, and a few other international news organizations reporting on the identity and background of the alleged killers in that case. Obviously, almost certainly, the killers, we can assume, were anti-Semitic. But it's being reported that they have ties to ISIS, for instance, allegiance to ISIS. And as you know, for some reason, the political correctness of many people in our society, including in the media, has precluded the acknowledgement that there have been many, many cases of murders committed by Muslims who, again, often against Jews, and it's just not central to the coverage or the national, international discussion about what we need to do about this. And in this case, it's kind of incredible that if you look at most Western news organizations, they're not naming the suspects and they're not pointing out that that's being reported what their ties are. So, Kevin, is this a problem that the identity of a lot of killers is either suppressed or not acknowledged at all if they're Muslim? Is that a problem for our society?
Yeah, it certainly is. And the question of how these individuals are getting radicalized, the fact that we don't want to talk about it in polite company and call it out when we see it, is hugely problematic. I mean, and we have a huge problem in our own country, right? 10,000 or so anti-Semitic incidents just this past year. That's 25 a day, right? That's not just violence and intimidation, but it's also a factor on college campuses. It's a problem within my own party, and we saw it inflamed on so many college campuses where, Democrats didn't want to address some of the core, issues with violence on these campuses because it wasn't a polite company. And I think we need to have authentic conversations. Part of it is the balance of not wanting to give more fame and attention to perpetrators and shooters and committers of these violent acts. But then part of it too is if it is part of a larger narrative, we need to address it and call it out. Certainly, Mark.
Amber?
I completely agree with your analysis of this, and I think it's especially so in this case because there's two narratives that the media doesn't want to cover. One is this purposeful attack against Jews, the anti-Semitism angle, and the other is the identity of the perpetrators and radical jihad. And I think the fact that it happened in Australia, the fact that there's these attacks happening across Europe, uh, there's an unwillingness to admit that there is a migration choice that was made to accept refugees from all over the Middle Eastern countries that have a lot of radical cells, and proper vetting was not done. And it's precisely why you have journalists who 2 years ago were saying that migrant grooming gangs didn't exist, now saying, well, yes, it's a problem, but it's not because of our migration policy. Nobody just wants to say the truth, the quiet part out loud, which is they made a deliberate choice to let in people without knowing where they were coming from or who they were associated with. And unfortunately, now we see the consequences of that.
Yeah. We need a debate about Israel's policies. We also need a debate about the Muslim community. We should not tar every person of a particular faith with the actions of the worst members of that group. But you can't ignore the long list of crimes committed by Muslims around the world against Jews and others who have an allegiance to a certain ideology, which seems to be a through line to a lot of these.
They say that something that's easy is like a walk in the park. Well, easier than a walk in the park, hit the subscribe button, be part of the two-way community, never miss an episode, be part of our conversations. Thank you for your service to America.
And don't forget, you can now listen to the morning meeting and Two Way Tonight on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.